So I am a self-professed Marshall snob and fanboy, and I'm actually probably a little bit proud of this fact. And maybe it's what makes me a lover of all things dad rock, but these amplifiers to me are some of the greatest amplifiers that were ever created. And I own two of them. This 1974 Super Lead sitting on top up here, and right below it is a 1978 JMP 50 Mark II Master Volume, which is the 2204 circuit that in 1982 became the JCM 800. My love of Marshall amps was started about 3 years ago when Matt Goldman and I moved into this spot together. He brought two Marshall amplifiers with him, a 1972 JMP 50 that's a 4-input amplifier and a 1986 JCM 800. And those weren't the first two Marshalls that I had ever used in the studio, but the other ones that I had were only here for a day or two, and so I wasn't able to spend the extensive amount of time that I've been able to spend with these amplifiers over the last 3 years. This led to me searching for my own Marshalls. I wanted to own my own, and then by the time that Matt decided to open up a second spot back in Atlanta, his hometown, I had already acquired for myself one, this 1974 Super Lead, and then within a few months of opening that studio, I actually found the 1978 2204 that sits behind it. When I first acquired the Super Lead, I joined a Facebook group called Marshall Amplifiers, Cabs, and Gear. And one of the reasons that I did that was because when I bought this Super Lead, it had actually been modded to be more like a 2203 or 2204. These top two inputs were disconnected, and then the bottom two inputs actually worked like the high sensitivity and low sensitivity on a JCM 800. And volume 1 on the amplifier was actually the master volume, and volume 2 was the gain. And it had been modded to have a ton of gain, so much in fact that I sort of felt like that the amp wasn't right for me. I mean, it had some mods done to it that made it definitely a lot more gainy, almost to the point of being too metal and not enough of the classic vibe that I was looking for from the Marshall. Also at this time, Goldman's JCM 800 was here, and I thought that the 800 actually sounded a lot better than the Super Lead for doing sort of the same kind of thing. And so my goal was to return the amplifier to stock. But that all changed when I took the amp to the sound doctor and we started talking about it, and I described to him what I wanted. And so my Super Lead for about 6 months has been modified, and there's two things that I had him do that have made this amp forever more useful to me, but also kept it more in keeping with the kind of tones that you would get out of a classic sounding Marshall. And the first one is that he ended up going back and forth between a couple of different schematics and showing me things that made the amp more gainy and things that would make it a little bit less gainy and more like an early plexi. And so we ended up going, and there's two different resistor values that the amp sort of goes between. And this is installed on the back of the amp with a knob that he simply called hair. And what the hair knob lets me do is that I can go to one resistor value that lets the amp be less gainy and have less hair, and if I want there to be a little bit more gain and a little bit more hair around the edge of the notes, I just simply turn that knob up. And then the second mod that he did for me was we added a post-phase inverter master volume. And what's really cool about this is it actually operates very, very similarly to the Friedman, to the BE100. And what I like about the BE100's master volume knob is that when you turn the master volume down, the amp doesn't seem to lose any of its sonic characteristics. Now it gets a little bit quieter and the speakers don't react quite the same, so that plays a little bit of effect. But when you just want to play the amplifier and enjoy the fact that you have something as wonderful as this BE100, it's nice to be able to turn it down to a bedroom level and just jam on it for fun when you're not making a record with it. that all brings me to today. I have had this 2204 JMP 50 watt Master Volume Mark II for about 6 months now. And I've been doing a little digging and a little bit of research on the differences between some of the mods that you can do. And I reached out to the sound doctor today because I want to take my JMP 50 2204 and have it modified by him. And the goal of this mod is to be able to still retain the things that I like about the low sensitivity input, the Marshall clean sound that's just very full and mid-rangey and interesting, and be able to keep some of the lower gain sounds when you're in the high sensitivity input with the gain knob rolled back, but to make the amp a little more versatile when you get into those higher gain ranges, and to fatten it up a little bit, because quite frankly, that's one of the shortcomings of this amp. When I'm tracking with this amp, almost always have to roll the bass knob all the way up to get enough low end out of it. And I oftentimes find myself rolling the top end, the treble back, and the mid-range back. And so I would like to make the amp a little more useful and versatile and give myself a wider sonic palette with the guitar amplifier, but at the same time, not encroach on the territory of the BE100, because quite frankly, I don't want to get rid of that amp. I want them to be able to be two different things, but be similarly versatile in the amount of sonic possibilities that you can achieve with each of the amplifiers. So with that said, we're gonna jump in the car and we're gonna head to Knoxville, Tennessee, and we're gonna pay a visit to John, the sound doctor, and get his opinion on what we should do with the mod and talk to him about some mods he's already done on many of these 2203 and 2204 model Marshall amplifiers. So let's go. All right, so we're here at the sound doctor's shop in Knoxville, and I've just dropped off my 2204 1978, and we've been looking at some different options. And basically what I've been talking to John, the sound doctor, about is that some of my issues with the amp are that it's lacking in the low end. I like the brightness, but it's a little bit too harsh at times, and then I want to get a little more gain out of it. And you've done several of these mods over the years, so what if somebody has one of these Marshalls, one of these vintage Marshalls, what are some of the things that they should consider when they're going to look at getting it modded, or if they're going to send it to you to have it modded?
Basically, I just kind of need to know what somebody's looking for. What, you know, if it's something like that, what do you like about it now? What do you dislike?
Sure.
And what you just stated about yours, and that's not an uncommon thing, by the way. I've done a couple of these where it's like the exact same thing. It's like, hey, I love it. I like the Marshall sound, but it's a little bit too bright, a little bit too sharp, and doesn't have enough meat. Even if I pull the bass all the way up, I'm just kind of not.
Yeah.
I want to marry a little bit more modern sound to the vintage 800 sound, you know. Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. I wanted to do the Marshall thing, but I want it to sound like it's from this decade. But I also, one of the things that we were talking about is that I have the Super Lead, which John's already modded for me. I also have the Friedman, and so I don't want this amp I don't want it to do the same exact thing that the Friedman does. I want it to be a little bit different. And so when we spent like, you know, probably 2 hours looking at different schematics and drawings and things that John has designed over the years, and when you've shown me some of the videos of things that you've kind of archived for your own purposes. And so where we landed is we're also going to add a clipper to the circuit. But is that something that if you have one of these vintage amps, like, should you be like worried about, oh man, I'm destroying my amp? Or like, what are things that people should think about if they're gonna add a clipper to the circuit? And then what is the end result of adding that gonna do?
Well, again, it may not be for everybody. You are looking for a certain sound.
Yeah.
But in the way that we're talking about doing it is keeping its versatility, you know, being able to dial that in or out, or take it completely out, you know. It may not be for everybody, you know. They may just like, hey, I want to add this or that, or, you know, it's just broke, and if you make it work right, for me, I'm happy.
Yeah. So what's your game? You're going to add, you've already explained it to me, but let's explain it for the folks at home. You've got a game plan for how you're going to achieve that in the controls of the amp.
Yeah, so for your clipper circuit, like I said, I think it would be great knowing that you're wanting to stay in between. I think if we put a clipper circuit in there and left it to that to be all the time, you'd lose some versatility, and it may shove you into an all-the-time game plan that's kind of closer to what the Friedman is, and you've already got a Friedman.
Right.
You know, you don't need another one. So I want to add a control. We can just put on the back of the amp
Yeah.
to where we can turn it on and bring that clipper in.
Sure.
And start adding an amount of it, so you've got complete control. And then if you take it completely out, it's back to not even having that.
Yeah.
Same thing as we talked about by adding some work on the negative feedback loop.
Okay.
You know, being able to just take it back to stock. So that way you can kind of go from your super lead and the range that it has with the mods that it has on
Sure.
it to the 800.
Yeah.
And then some range there, and then you could go to Freeman.
Yeah. So we're getting a lot more versatility, which is what, you know, obviously what I want for the studio, and get a lot more kind of range of use, but not also, you know, trying not to sacrifice too much. But there is always, that's one of the things that you're explaining to me that I think people should know too. There's always, when you start changing circuits, there's always going to be some kind of compromise that you're making to a degree.
Yeah, there's a trade-off. That's the way it is. But it's finding the balance that fits for each individual and their uses. For you know where you want to go. You know you want to be in between this and that. And we know that using it in a studio, you're never exactly sure how you're going to dial that thing.
Sure.
You've got an idea, but if we keep versatility to it, that's just a big plus. To be able to use in the studio.
Yeah. So this is going to be part 1 of this video series, and part 2 will be when the amp gets completed, and we'll come and we'll pick it up and we'll talk about some of what we did, and then get it into the studio and do some sound clips so that
make Curtis play on it.
We'll make Curtis play on it some. Yeah, we definitely need to do that. We don't want me playing on it. But if you want to get a hold of John, you know, as you're watching through this series, if the other video's out by the time you've watched this, there'll be a link down below so that you can send your amp to the sound doctor, or if you're close to Knoxville, you can drive it in and drop it off and get John to work on it. He definitely knows what he's doing, and I've loved the work that he's done for me over the years. So subscribe, like, hit the bell, all the things that you're supposed to do, and I'll see you in the next one.